This is not a story about a gunfight. It's not a story about a badge or a gang, or a feud over a dusty Arizona street. This is a story about two people who found each other in the most unlikely place on earth and never let go. For 47 years, he was the most famous lawman in the Wild West. She was a Jewish girl from Brooklyn who had run away from home looking for adventure. They met in a boomtown that was about to explode into the most famous gunfight in American history, and when the smoke cleared from the gunfight, from the vendetta ride, from everything that tried to tear them apart, she was still there. She waited when he was on the run. She followed him to gold fields in Alaska. She slept in desert mining camps and rented rooms above saloons, and sat beside him in Hollywood as he told silent film stars how the West really was. And when he died, penniless, aged 80, in a small Los Angeles bungalow, she was holding his hand. This is the love story the history books buried under the gunfights, the most beautiful love story in Wild West history. She waited 30 years. The girl from Brooklyn, Josephine Sarah Marcus, was born in 1861 in Brooklyn, New York, to a family of Jewish immigrants, her father a baker from Prussia. Her mother fiercely determined that her daughter would have a respectable life in their adopted city. When Josephine was 7, the family moved to San Francisco. And San Francisco in the 1870s was, by any measure, one of the most electrifying cities in the world, a boomtown of wealth and ambition and theater and possibility that must have felt almost unbearably alive to a girl who had grown up in a Brooklyn tenement. She loved the theater above everything, the drama of it, the costumes and the gaslit stages, and the way a good story could make a whole room go quiet and lean forward at exactly the same moment. When she was 17 or 18, the exact year is uncertain, she ran away from home to join a traveling theatrical troupe heading into Arizona territory, not because she was unhappy, because she was hungry for everything the world contained that San Francisco's parlors hadn't yet shown her. She went looking for adventure. What she found instead was the OK Corral, and the man who would share the rest of her life. In Tombstone, Arizona, she met a man named Johnny Behan, the sheriff of Cochise County, handsome and charming and entirely unreliable. He promised to marry her. She believed him. He did not keep that promise, but staying in Tombstone for Johnny Behan led her, in the autumn of 1881, to stand in the streets of a silver boomtown and catch the eye of a tall, laconic deputy marshal with ice-blue eyes. His name was Wyatt Earp. At Tombstone in 1881 was, by any description, an extraordinary place to fall in love. It was a silver boomtown of 6,000 souls, crammed into wooden buildings on a desert plateau, saloons and opera, houses and newspaper offices and gunfighters, all pressed together under an enormous Arizona sky. It was also about to become the most famous single street in American history. Josephine and Wyatt's courtship happened in the middle of everything. The political tensions, the feuds between the Earps and the Cowboys faction, the coming storm that everyone in Tombstone could feel building. Johnny Behan, the man Josephine had followed to Tombstone, was squarely on the opposing side from Wyatt. When Josephine discovered Behan had been cheating on her, she left him. The only question was where she would go. By early 1881, Josephine Marcus had made her choice. She and Wyatt Earp were together. The most famous gunfight in American history was still months away. But the love story had already begun. October 26, 1881, the gunfight at the OK Corral. Wyatt walked into the fight and walked back out, not a scratch, but what followed was worse than any single gunfight. Morgan Earp was assassinated. Virgil was ambushed and crippled. Wyatt launched the vendetta ride and became, technically, a wanted fugitive. He sent Josephine back to her parents in San Francisco for her own safety. He told her he would come for her, while Wyatt evaded arrest warrants across Colorado and New Mexico. In the spring and summer of 1882, Josephine Marcus was in San Francisco with her parents. She had no guarantee he was coming. She had no ring, no legal promise, no formal commitment. What she had was the memory of a man who had looked at her like she was worth coming back for. In the winter of 1882-83, Josephine crossed Market Street in San Francisco and slipped into Chinatown. to a quiet address where a man wanted in Arizona territory was waiting for her. She had chosen him, and he had come. From that moment they were inseparable. They called her Sadie sometimes, a nickname that stuck from her theatrical days. He called her Josie. She called him Wyatt, always Wyatt. Even when the rest of the world called him the last great lawman of the frontier. For the next decade, they lived the way the frontier demanded, moving, adapting, surviving. San Diego, where Wyatt dealt cards in saloons near the waterfront. San Francisco, where they stayed with her family in the good times. She followed him everywhere. Not because she had no choice. Josephine Marcus was never a woman without options, but because she had chosen him, completely and without reservation. I find something genuinely moving about Josephine Earp when I research her, not because she was passive or devoted in some conventional Victorian sense, but because she was clearly just as fierce as he was. She ran away at 17. She stood in the streets of Tombstone when any sensible person would have left. She followed a fugitive into a San Francisco backstreet to find him. This was not a woman swept along by a man. This was a woman who had decided and acted on that decision every single day for 47 years. In 1897, the Klondike Gold Rush transformed the American Northwest into a new kind of frontier. The last one, many said. The last place a man could still go looking for fortune at the edge of the world. Wyatt Earp went to Alaska. Josephine went with him. They spent several years in Nome, Alaska, at the very edge of the continent. Wyatt ran a saloon, his usual frontier business. Josephine managed the household, the accounts, the social landscape of a boomtown that made Tombstone look tame. They left Alaska with somewhere around $80,000, a fortune by any measure of the time. Enough to retire. Enough to finally stop running. There is a photograph of them together at a California mining camp in 1906. They are older, weathered, completely at ease with each other. They look like two people who have been through everything and arrived somehow still together. The fortune from Alaska did not last. Mining ventures in California and Nevada came to nothing. The oil speculation failed. By the early 1920s, they were depending on loans from Josephine's sister Henrietta to keep the lights on, but they were still together. That, to both of them, was apparently the only thing that mattered. In their later years, Wyatt and Josephine settled in Los Angeles and found themselves, almost by accident, at the center of Hollywood's obsession with the world they had actually lived in. Silent film stars sought Wyatt out. Directors wanted to know how a gunfight actually sounded. A young cowboy actor named Tom Mix became one of their closest friends. John Ford, who would go on to define the Western film genre for generations, sat in their parlor and listened to Wyatt tell stories. Josephine spent those years doing something she considered just as important as any gunfight. She protected his legacy. When a biographer named Stuart Lake began writing Wyatt Earp, Frontier Marshal, Josephine fought to shape every line. She was fierce about it, threatening legal action, demanding changes, insisting the story be told on their terms. She had spent 40 years building the life they had together, and she was not about to let someone else's pen unmake it. Here is what I find most remarkable about Josephine in those Hollywood years. She was not protecting Wyatt's reputation for his sake alone. She was protecting the love story. The idea that a Jewish girl from Brooklyn who ran away from home and the most famous lawman in the Wild West had found each other in a silver boomtown and built something that lasted. She needed the world to know that story was real. Because it was. On January 13th, 1929, Wyatt Earp was 80 years old. He was dying of prostate cancer. The Wild West he had ridden through was not a memory anymore. It was a movie genre, something young men in theaters watched in the dark, and Josephine was beside him. His last words, as we have mentioned on this channel before, were, supposing. Oh well, nobody knows exactly what he was supposing about. Perhaps his first wife Orilla, who had died young and left him broken. Perhaps Morgan, whose murder had started the vendetta ride. Perhaps the long, strange journey from a Kansas cattle town to a Hollywood parlor. Or perhaps nothing philosophical at all. Perhaps he was just an old man, tired, at peace and ready. Josephine was too overcome with grief to attend his funeral. She had his ashes buried quietly in the Marcus family plot near San Francisco, her family's ground, not a hero's monument. That says everything about what he was to her, not a legend. Her husband. She lived 15 more years after he died. She spent most of them fighting anyone who tried to tell his story wrong and struggling with the finances that had never quite sorted themselves out. In 1944, Josephine Earp died in the same small Los Angeles bungalow she and Wyatt had shared. She died penniless.
Her funeral was paid for by a theater owner and a cowboy film star, two people whose world she and Wyatt had helped build. Her ashes were taken to Colma, California, and buried beside his, together again, as they had been for 47 years. The story of Wyatt and Josephine Earp is not the story history chose to tell. History told the gunfight. History told the badge and the vendetta and the legend. But the real story, the one that lasted, the one that survived Tombstone and the vendetta ride and Alaska and poverty and Hollywood, was a love story. A Jewish girl from Brooklyn who ran away looking for adventure. A lawman who had already lost one wife to illness and thought love might not be something life intended to give him twice. Finding each other in a silver boomtown the year before the most famous gunfight in American history. And choosing each other, every day, for 47 years after that. She stayed with him when they left Alaska, $80,000 richer, and she did not abandon him when they could not pay their rent. Subscribe to Legends of Wild West. We have told you the gunfights and the outlaws and the sacred legends and the lawmen. But this is the one we want you to share with someone you love. Because the frontier was not only made by gunpowder, it was made by the people who chose each other inside it.